The red ink still bled on her fingertips, faint but there. It clung to the edges of her nails the way certain memories cling to the edges of the mind, unwanted, stubborn, impossible to scrub away. Mariah Jordan had been teaching English at Lincoln High for 7 years, and she graded essays the same way her favorite professor once graded hers, mercilessly, but with purpose. Red ink, not to humiliate, but to sharpen the steel of young minds. It was late that Tuesday. The parking lot behind the school was already empty, except for her silver Honda and a scattering of autumn leaves that the wind had been pushing in restless circles. She had stayed long after the bell, with a small stack of senior essays that refused to read themselves. She liked the quiet of the empty building, the way the echoes belonged to her alone, the way the world seemed briefly to slow down. She slid into her car, put the folder of graded essays on the passenger seat, and started the engine. Her mind was still on Jamal Peterson's argumentative essay about systemic injustice, a raw, uneven piece with too much heart to ignore. She'd written, "Push further" in the margin, underlining it twice. The road home was dimly lit, a stretch of asphalt lined with sleepy houses and overgrown yards. She was halfway down when the blue and red lights flared behind her. At first she thought it was someone else. She slowed, signaled, and moved to the right, but the cruiser followed. Her pulse quickened. The siren wailed once, sharp as a blade. Mariah pulled over, rolled down the window, and waited. The cop approached slowly, as if savoring the moment. White, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved by resentment. His flashlight beam cut through the car like it was searching for something worth destroying. "Evening," he said, though his voice held none of the warmth the word suggested. "License and registration." She handed them over without a word. "You know why I stopped you?" "No, officer," she said, keeping her tone measured. He leaned in. The flashlight's glare made her blink. Broken taillight. She knew it wasn't broken. She'd had the car inspected just a month ago. "Step out of the vehicle." Her stomach nodded. "Is that necessary?" Step out." The words were no longer a request. Mariah stepped out, hugging her cardigan around herself. "Mind if I search the car?" "Yes, I do mind." That was all he needed to hear. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to stand right here." He guided her toward the sidewalk, his hand hovering near his holster as though she were a threat. Within minutes, another cruiser pulled up, then another. She could see curtains twitching in nearby houses, doors opening, faces peeking. And then the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps she recognized. Her heart sunk. Across the street, a cluster of teenagers emerged from the corner store, laughing until they saw her. Her students. "Miss Jordan?" one of them called out, confusion laced with disbelief. The cop popped open her passenger door and pulled the folder from the seat. He flipped it open like he was rifling through evidence. The essays slipped, scattering across the pavement like fallen leaves. Some landed face up with her red comment stark against the white paper. "What's all this?" he asked, waving a sheet. "I'm a teacher," she said, the heat rising in her cheeks. "Those are graded assignments." The kids were closer now, staring. One whisper, "Damn." The cop didn't seem to hear or didn't care. He searched her trunk, her back seat, under her mats. Nothing, of course. When he finally let her go, she gathered the papers from the ground, her fingers trembling. The red ink smeared in places, a cruel mirror of how her dignity felt in that moment, smeared and exposed. She drove home in silence, the laughter of her students replaying in her head, except now it sounded different, sharper. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she opened her laptop and began to type. Not lesson plans, not grading notes, a letter. "Dear City of Brookfield," she began.
The words came slow at first, then in a flood. She wrote about the stop, about the way his eyes measured her worth before she even spoke, about the weight of humiliation in front of the very students she was trying to teach self-worth, about how the red ink she used to guide young minds had been scattered on the street like it was worthless. By dawn, the letter was finished. She posted it on her personal blog, then shared the link on her social media with the caption, "This is what it means to be stopped while black in Brookfield." She didn't expect what came next. By noon, the post had been shared thousands of times. Former students, fellow teachers, strangers from across the country were flooding her inbox with messages of outrage and support. Local reporters began calling. National ones followed. The Brookfield Police Department released a bland two-sentence statement. "We are aware of the allegations and will conduct an internal review." She knew what that meant. Nothing. The officer, his name was Sergeant Dale Kincaid, was still out there, pulling over whomever he pleased. And she was still walking into her classroom every day, knowing that some of her students had seen her treated like a criminal for no reason. It would have been easy to let the story fade. Viral outrage burned bright and died fast. But Mariah didn't let it die. She gave interviews. She spoke at community meetings. She started a mentoring group for young black students to talk about police encounters. She became a face, a voice, a name people recognized in the fight for accountability. Years passed. She kept teaching, but something had shifted in her. And when the opportunity came, when a city council seat opened and people began urging her to run, she didn't hesitate. She ran. And she won. Her first day in office, she wore a deep crimson blazer, the color of the ink she had once used to mark essays. The chamber was packed, supporters, reporters, even some of her old students, now grown. On the agenda, leadership restructuring in the Brookfield Police Department. She didn't drag it out. "Effective immediately," she said into the microphone, her voice steady. "Sergeant Dale Kincaid and the current department leadership will be relieved of their duties. This council has voted to begin a full overhaul of department policy, oversight, and community relations." The gasp that rippled through the room was almost satisfying enough. Almost. Somewhere in the back, she thought she saw him. The same narrowed eyes, the same jaw set in disbelief. But now it was his turn to be searched. Not his car, his career, his reputation, his power. And this time, the ink that would mark his record would never wash away.
She filed her own formal complaint anyway. It was dismissed in less than 3 weeks. That was when she understood. She couldn't win this fight as a teacher alone. She needed a bigger platform, a louder microphone. So she joined the Brookfield Community Justice Coalition. She started speaking at council meetings even when she was the only black woman in the room. She read her letter aloud more times than she could count. Sometimes people clapped. Sometimes they just stared. But she kept reading it. She wanted it etched into the memory of the city. Her students, the ones who had witnessed the stop, never forgot. Jamal, who had once written about systemic injustice in a paper she'd marked in red, came to her after graduation. "You ever think about running for something?" he asked. "Politics isn't my style." "Neither is getting humiliated on the street," he said. "But you stood there and took it. Maybe you could stand there and change something too." The seed was planted. 2 years later, Brookfield erupted over another traffic stop, this one ending with a black man hospitalized. The officer? Not Kincaid, but one of his protégés. Mariah stood at the rally in front of City Hall, holding a microphone that felt heavier than any textbook she'd ever carried. "We keep asking for change. We keep asking nicely. What has it gotten us? Another black man in a hospital bed? Another officer on paid leave?
Another family waiting for justice that will never come unless we take it. When the chant started, "Run, Mariah, run!" she didn't stop them. The campaign was grueling. She still taught full-time. She still graded papers late into the night. But now she was also knocking on doors, shaking hands, explaining to people why local government mattered. She wore through 2 pairs of flats walking the neighborhoods. Some people smiled and took her flyer. Others shut the door in her face. One man told her, "You should be grateful you even have a job after all the trouble you caused." She smiled and kept walking. Her campaign slogan was simple: marking change in red ink. She leaned into it. She told people the story of that night, of how her work and her dignity had been scattered in the street. And she promised to grade Brookfield's leadership the way she graded her students, honestly, even when it hurt. When she won, it wasn't a landslide, but it was decisive. The morning of her swearing in, she stood in front of her mirror and put on the crimson blazer she had bought for this moment. Not scarlet, not cherry, crimson, deep and deliberate. The color of power, of resolve, of blood that had been spilled without justice. Her first act as a council member was the restructuring vote. The motion passed, 5-2. Kincaid's face as the decision was read was not the look of a man who believed in justice. It was the look of someone who would believe the rules would always protect him until they didn't. The overhaul began within weeks. Leadership positions were vacated. An independent oversight board was created. Community liaisons were hired. The training curriculum was rebuilt from the ground up. None of it erased what had happened to her. But one afternoon, months later, she was leaving City Hall when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see Jamal. Older now, taller, with the same fire in his eyes. "They got him," he said. "Kincaid. He applied to another department. They saw his file from the oversight board and shut it down." Mariah felt the wind lift her hair.